Welcome to Talking Events. We are at the offices of Richmond Event Management in the heart of Bristol, and today's podcast is going to be a straightforward one-on-one. We've got Mike Richmond from REM in the studio with us, and we're going to be picking your brains, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
That's okay.
We're going to look, first of all, at winter events and their growth. I think it's fair to say maybe in the last, let's say 10 years, there's certainly been a massive growth in how many winter events now take place. Let's start with that. What's your experience of the growth of that particular sector of our industry?
Without a doubt, it's probably equal to the busiest part of the summer now, for us anyway. You've just got Halloween, bonfire night, and that now traditionally was November the 5th. It's now the 6th, the 7th, and in some circumstances the weekend after, depending on how November the 5th lies. And then you're into, before you know it, Christmas light switch-ons. They're now early November through to sort of the start of December. Christmas markets, Christmas events. We actually organise a thing called the Festival of Christmas in Portsmouth at the historic dockyard. So our programme, if I'm a good indicator for the rest of the industry, then we find certainly almost now right up to Christmas, from the end of October, just about as equally busy as the middle of the summer.
Has it caught the industry out at all? Have winter events almost crept up on us and suddenly before we know it, oh crikey, we're as busy now as we are in the summertime, and have we had to play catch up at all?
Well, I used to interview staff to work at REM. I said, when we've got the end of the summer, you can have a rest. And then unfortunately that doesn't happen anymore because you're planning we did start talking about Christmas events in April. And then when you've come out of the summer, you start picking them up and dealing with them. I think we've got 12 events between now and Christmas, of different shapes and size, I think that's healthy. I don't think I've been caught out by it, but I now realise that it is a full 12-month programme. There are people in the industry that just work the summer and go off and have a nice relaxing winter. We chose not to do that. The only thing I say that we don't do really is we've always sort of been sacrosanct is not to do New Year's Eve events. I think my staff would shoot me if I said we're doing a big New Year's Eve event. I think they'd probably walk out the door. But when we have finished for Christmas, we're properly finished. And January, February, still winter, but that's our kind of downtime and start planning for the summer.
So where we are now, first week in October when we're recording this episode, the planning for your winter events is already not just well underway, but almost nearing its completion in many respects.
In many respects it is. I mean, we've got our licences in, haven't we? If we're doing them in a few weeks' time, all our applications are in. There's still a lot of logistics around that. And actually deploying a large amount of crew and staff that is probably the largest challenge. With a succession of winter events, they tend to be smaller, but they tend to be of a duration, which can lead to bigger staffing requirements. That said, a fireworks night isn't quite as hasn't got a great deal of longevity, but we'll have 3 shows on that night, which we are site managing and producing, 2 in Liverpool, 1 in Bristol. So, I've got to deploy staff here, there and everywhere for that. And then we're straight on to Christmas light switch-ons. And we're involved with Bradford, Bath, and others, and Salisbury, just to name a few. So there are a succession of sort of one-day events, and then you get into long markets that might be 3 or 4 weeks on site.
In that respect, does it make it trickier to handle than some of the summer events, given that you've got a light switch on which will be, perhaps a tea time event, a couple of hours, in, out, thank you very much, and then these markets, so logistically you're actually juggling more than you would be in the summer? Yeah,
I mean, the market runs are longer than any event run on site in the summer. You build them a month before and you take them out a month later, and you've still got to service those. So, the nice short ones are nice. The long duration ones, it's a hell of a commitment to send somebody to site for 33 days just before Christmas.
Most of these, what's the mixture between private events, or and local authority events? I mean, from where I sit, I see an awful lot of these winter events being organised by local authorities. Is that your experience of it?
Yeah, pretty much all of them are local authority, apart from, or they're either local authority or the governance is with somebody akin to local authority, whether that's a bid team or a city development team or whatever. We had a rash of ice rinks at once upon a time. We've now got a sort of rash of markets appearing all around the country, Christmas markets, and they start earlier and earlier and finish longer and later because that retail offer is there to be exploited. So yeah, I guess most of them are generated by local authority need, and one or two of them are private, but the private ones are more of a party-based event than a public thing.
Sure. How serious are the events now getting in terms of the level of production that's going into them?
They're certainly no longer just a bonfire and some fireworks in that respect. They are meant to be about customer experiences. They're also meant to be really a show in its own right. And some local authorities very boldly take that on and produce major productions as part of their fireworks night shows. Probably save money by not doing bonfires because they can be hazardous, to say the least. So I think you'll find that the short visitor patterns, but they're great shows, and therefore they require higher production values. When
we were actually down in Bristol a few weeks ago, before recording this, we were down at the Local Authority Event Organisers Group conference, and which was just over the road from your offices. One of the things that they were talking about during their conference was the impact that the reduced budgets are having as local, and it's something they've got to struggle with every year. But recently they have seen some really big cutbacks, and they're talking about all sorts of different ways of fundraising and sourcing sponsorship. What impact does it have on winter events? Are local authorities more likely to stay with their summer events program or their winter events program, or is it really horses for courses now?
I think the tendency would to be stay with your summer events program because the weather risk is less. Although the authorities that we're working for are pretty bold in their output. They've got an event strategy that this is the vision, this is what we want to do for the people in our cities, and they tend to be the local authorities with let's put it this way, without the budget restriction. They've all got budget restriction, but the fact that their budgets are earmarked as critical, whether that's by an elected cabinet or whether that's by a mayor or whatever, the events are the thing that make their city tick, then you don't find that they disappear. It's perhaps the smaller authorities that look at it and say, look, well, we're spending X on a 2-hour show when we could spend that on a week's event in summer.
When it comes to planning these and executing them, what are the fundamental differences that you would have in your program of planning with a winter event compared to summer? Now, there's the obvious issue of things like light and the likelihood of cold weather, wet weather. How does it impact you?
Your toolkit's slightly different, albeit the principles are the same. You can pretty much guarantee that you're going to have some instance of adverse weather. You probably could guarantee that in the summer in some particular summers, yes. But so you actually go out with a different sort of toolkit, and the staff that are working for you are probably the most important part of that toolkit. So they need to be prepared for a long haul, a cold long haul, especially if you're sort of site manager or production manager of a 30-day market. It's an endurance test, without doubt. So what we tend to do is have a very thorough briefings with all our staff and make sure that they're out there, know what is coming. Once you get them embedded, they kind of run for themselves. But it's like any summer event. There's a build, a break, and in the middle there's a show, and nothing really changed in that context.
Let us take this with a pinch of salt. But the Daily Express, last month. Published an article saying that we're in a shock weather warning, that we're going to experience the coldest winter for 50 years, set to bring months of heavy snow and cold weather to the UK, sub-zero temperatures, etc., etc., etc. Now, as I said, let's take it with a pinch of salt. This is tabloid journalism. But when it comes to something like the actual infrastructure, the temporary infrastructure that you're putting in for events, so generators, lighting for a stage, what have you actually got to do differently when you're identifying what's going to work and what's not going to work?
Well, you'd want to be using suppliers and contractors that are up for it, up for that winter installation. And I'm yet to find ones that aren't. You probably need a bit more welfare. You certainly need to give people rests and find places where they can get warm. And you need to provide a lot of hot drinks. But you don't necessarily need to do that in the summer. So I guess it's all about, I think the contractors that we work with across the winter are used to it. And whether that's in the summer or the winter, I mean, you can get as cold at Glastonbury as you can at Salisbury Christmas Market, to be frank.
Yeah.
If we have really adverse weather conditions, then we've obviously got contingency plans in, show stop procedures, and the fact that ultimately, if it's that bad, nobody's going to turn up. So we always advise our clients and organisers to make sure that they're insured for that, and make sure that they have got a plan B or a wet weather plan, because without doubt you'll get it during that period.
We've already talked about budgets, but are most of the events that you're dealing with in the winter period free events?
They all are, apart from one. The Festival of Christmas in Portsmouth is a ticketed event in Portsmouth Historic Dockyard. Been going now for best part of 15 years, very successful, 30-odd thousand people. That's the only ticketed one. The rest of them are free public events that would be attended by numbers up to 15,000-20,000 for a firework display in Liverpool, or light switch on in Bradford can be anything from 7,000 to 17,000.
Logistically, not only are you dealing with different weather conditions due to the different time of year, but again, presumably a lot of these events are taking place in more urban areas as opposed to greenfield locations. Again, let's look at some of the differences in dealing with that, particularly given it's in the winter months.
Well, when you build a market in the middle of a city square, let's say, then you've got the challenges of dealing with the retail offer at the same time as you're building, because that city's still functioning. You've got coach parties to deal with. You've already got the Christmas shop going on, and you're building some more shops. So effectively, you've got to deal with heavy crowds in and around your build area. We're a lot tighter on that these days, where we actually, fence the area off, and it's effectively a CDM site. We're building temporary demountable structures, and that's where the welfare comes in, and the rest of it. So all the crew have got correct equipment for the jobs. They are all pretty much city centre. Obviously, fireworks don't tend to work on November the 5th in city centres, but they are in parks adjacent to major populations. Such a short visitor pattern, something like that. We might be sending off. The show might start at 7 and finish at 7:30. Everybody arrives at 7:15. So it's a different dynamic because it's cold.
When it comes to the permanent infrastructure that you have in these city centres and urban locations for the winter events, given that they have increased in their frequency and the size, how proactive have local authorities been in putting better permanent infrastructure into their city centres to allow you to deliver these events?
I think the facilities nowadays are much better. There are obviously ones that aren't great, but if you take a city like Bradford, for example, beautiful new city park. It's got all the infrastructure you need, all the power, all the water's there, the emergency lighting's there. It's a great example of a new bit of public realm that's been thought about.
If I'm right in saying that this is the one that has the water feature in the middle that can actually be drained to create more space for people.
Correct, yeah, absolutely. And in that design phase, the architects actually consulted the industry about what was required. In order to make it a public open space that was attractive, but also in a space that could be used not just for winter events, but for summer events as well. And that's a really good. It's rejuvenated the city centre in Bradford to a degree, and it's easier for a production company like us to go in because the services are already there. There are other examples that aren't quite so clever when it comes to organising public realm events. The dreaded. Everybody likes street furniture if you're doing a daily shop, but to the event organiser, it can be the blight of your production, benches and trees and what have you. We'd all ideally like none of that, but unfortunately that doesn't make the place look pretty. So
absolutely, yeah.
We've got to work around that, and weight restrictions and hidden chambers and things like that. There's always challenges. If you do we've done the Bath Christmas light switch on for many years, and we close off Milsom Street, which is right in the middle of Bath, and we've got to shoehorn a Roger Barrett stage in there and hang some PAN lights and then whoever it is, the celebrity turns it on. It all happens in one day. And it's all gone by 9 o'clock that night. But, so that's an interesting challenge. You haven't got anything to go on there because it's a heritage city. There's no power, there's no water, so you have to bring it all in.
Well, on the subject, you mentioned power, and I saw you deliver a session at a conference a while back on sustainability. And one of the things that you touched on when you were looking at various ways in which an event can address its sustainability was a subject of power. And I'm sure that you mentioned in that session that where possible, you're trying to source mains power, if you can, to reduce the number of generators that are used, improve the efficiency of the generators that are being used on site. Again, when we're looking specifically at winter events, are these city centre locations giving you better quality mains power to actually power these?
Some are, without a doubt. I'll be at least 2 market squares this winter that have got permanent power installations based on the fact that they've got a market going in there every winter. Salisbury and Bath, give them a name check, and they've invested on the infrastructure because they don't want generation. And notorious nature of market traders is that they'll probably bring something and plug it in that they shouldn't have there. And it'll trip. So you can trail that back all the way to the box that they've installed and say, yeah, that's the one that's tripped it. So it helps in the long run. Wherever possible, sustainability is important. So you've got to try and avoid importing massive generators when actually you might not need them, or you might need a different type. Far too often I see lorries of generators turning up with generators that are brought in to power a cabin. When actually you could probably do it with a generator much smaller than the one that's been brought in.
It might be a daft question. Anybody listening out there who knows the answer to this immediately, then feel free to shoot me when you next see me on the street. But is there a difference in efficiency with traditional diesel generators compared to summer and winter? I mean, presumably that they get up to temperature once they're running, but is there a difference in fuel and the amount that they'll use?
Negligible. As far as I'm aware, there's not a great deal of difference. They may start up a little more difficultly in the winter, but I think there's very little difference. They're all compound sets, they're all sure. Encased. They're like a car in a way. Occasionally you might have a bit of trouble starting in the morning, but that's it.
When we look at perhaps not saturation, maybe the wrong word, but have we seen in the growth get to its sort of peak at the moment, or are you still seeing new events coming along? Are people increasing their winter events? How difficult will it be to actually grow further than it is at the moment?
I think there's always room for growth, but I think eventually with all things there'll be a saturation point. And if you took every local authority in the UK and said you're having a Christmas market, there won't be enough traders. But then if you look at the November the 5th events, every club, PTA, social club, school, rugby club, you name it, will be doing a fireworks show. So that's an example, that particular weekend of I wouldn't say saturation point, but that is where everybody does a display. I don't personally want to do one, but I'll help organise other people's.
In a previous episode of Talking Events, when you're on the show with some of your colleagues, we looked at the subject of procurement. And I know it's a subject that you've had opinions on. If people want to listen back to that previous episode, you'll hear what Mike had to say about that. But just extending it a little bit further, how does your own procurement process work in terms of sourcing suppliers? So when you are contracted to stage an event for somebody, how does your own procurement work, and how have you found the best way to approach it is?
The best way to approach it is have a good supply management system, whereby I will be looking for contractors that are a member of at least one trade association and abide by its code of practice, if that is the case. One of our criteria. I'll be looking at their safety record, I'll be looking at their insurances, and then I will be looking at their price for the spec that we send out. And a combination of those factors should generate good contractor-subcontractor relationships. I'll also be looking, one of the most key things for me is I'll be looking at when they want pain. And probably one of the most sensible things that I would suggest to them is that, if you trust us, give us 30 days. If you don't trust us, then we don't do business with you. Far too often in the past we've been rung up by accounts departments whilst we're on the show asking for the cheque. Well, now we do backs now, but if you try and find a chequebook in the middle of a rainy site under a marquee that they've just built for you, it's virtually impossible. So I'm a big fan of getting terms right with contractors. We've got an amazing payment record. We never owed anybody a penny, and no institutional debt. So trust us. Our credit rating will be great. Give us good terms, and you've got half a chance of getting the work.
Do you have a set of regular go-to guys, or do you change the suppliers? Do you look at it based on locality and where they are in relation to a particular event site?
Yes, the sustainability cause comes in. If we're doing shows in Bristol, we try and use Bristol suppliers where we can. And then we try and share the love a little bit. There's no point in using the same contractors all the time. After 20 years of REM, you get to know who's good and who is reliable and who's fair and whose price is fair for the job. So you end up having sort of a roster, but you'd share it around those rosters. And always looking for new, innovative companies to do things for us. I'd say probably this year we've met and used about another 4 or 5 new contractors this year on our shows. So each time we find them, if they're good, we'll stick with them.
So it's not a closed shop by any stretch.
Can't afford it to be. I think the market gets a bit monopolised if you close the shop.
And obviously you look on event industry news as well for what's happening.
Look in the directory.
You mentioned technology. And event technology is something that we look at an awful lot through event industry news, perhaps in other scenarios, but have you seen technology impact on the actual event management side of things? I know technology is used a lot by the actual suppliers themselves for various reasons, but how has it impacted your own work?
It definitely has, yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of systems out there that we might be interested in using on our shows. But just the modus operandi of the company's changed. I'm still a fan. I still tell the staff, I say, look, it's all very well emailing and being in contact with people that way. Occasionally, it's good to ring the client. They like a voice as well. So we have a little thing on a Friday where if you've got to ring the client on a Friday, if you've emailed them all week, just ring them on Friday and see if they're all right, and then they go home a little happier for the weekend. So I think you blend new technology with old school. And some of the generation that I work with and have worked with prefer old school, and then you might send an email afterwards. Talk about it, send an email, not email and don't talk about it.
You talked about your procurement process and sourcing contractors and sourcing suppliers, and the criteria that you would look for. How much of it still comes down to somebody coming out to see you, shaking your hand, and having an instant trust of that person because they're a likeable or a trustworthy person?
Yeah, it's very, very important. We used to have production meetings where we would all sit in the room, all the contractors, and talk about the show. And they would come, that's the lighting, the PA, the stage, everybody in there to just talk about how we're going to do it, what's the loading, and we'd walk away with a plan. Now we kind of do it by email, and I think you'd lose that. You lose that sensitivity, and you lose that idea pot that the production meeting used to have. And you also
the ideas bouncing off each other in a room.
You also lose the creativity, and you also lose the possibility of sharing. So, if you just take a truck, for example, if somebody's bringing half a truck and they're passing the guy that needs half a truck, we'll pick his lot up and bring it with him. So that used to happen in the old sort of production meeting. I have to say, we still do have the odd old production meeting, but nowadays it's normally done on email, quote, and visual, as opposed to all sitting in the room. In fact, next week I've got a very important production meeting where we're all sitting in the room because it's so close to the event that we need to sit in the room. We can't do it by exchange of email or technology. Now we can all conference call, but laying the plan out and still looking at the plan physically all together, I think is still an important thing.
We've spent today's episode talking about winter events predominantly. You mentioned that when the winter event season comes to a close for you guys, then January and February is fairly quiet, and no doubt you're still in the offices, and no doubt there's still work to be done.
Yep.
But when we look then ahead to the summer event season for next year, how are things changing there? And perhaps we can pick this up on another episode, who knows, in future, talk about that. But where will you go to once the winter event closes?
What, for a holiday? We'll probably start. So we've got some key long contract events. We'd probably start advancing them from a trader perspective, because there's no point in trying to book a trader whilst they're in a market somewhere. So you do it in the new year. The new year is our income push and revenue generation, and applications for trading at our events go out in the new year. And some of those events aren't till August. But importantly for our clients, we get the income in order to know where we stand. So you end up with a situation by May where you are in a red, amber, green situation. If you're in green, crack on. If you're in amber, push again. If you're in red, then don't go much further. So our income generation peak January, February, March. So it doesn't really stop. May get a holiday. We'll see.
I'd love to get you back on talking events again in future. Then perhaps you can come back at another time and talk about the summer event season, because I'm sure there's all sorts of things that we could talk about on that particular subject. Sure. I'm sure that perhaps people listening to the podcast may have questions for Mike. If you do, tweet them at Talking Events. I'm sure we can get them to you somehow, and maybe get a bit of a Q&A going. Ask Mike.
How's that?
Oh, there we go. Ask Mike is the hashtag. Tweet us at Talking Events. For now, we're going to wrap up today's episode. Mike Richmond from REM, thank you very much for letting us use your offices to set up our studio and do our podcast. As always, you can watch a video of the podcast via the Event Industry News YouTube channel. You'll be able to visit eventindustrynews.co.uk to listen to the podcast. It's also available as a download on iTunes. Just search for Talking Events. Thanks for listening.